In hindsight, people say, well, did this county really need to spend this much or that? Well, obviously, if they knew the storm was going to turn, then they probably wouldn't have needed to do as much, but you just don't know that. So I think that they behave responsibly. So I talked with Marco probably about an hour or two ago about that, and we're going to be working with the administration to basically provide the reimbursements, and then I think that sends a good message that, you know, it really is the right thing to do to be prepared.
There are mandatory evacuations in about a dozen counties or so. How long will those evacuations be in place?
I think they're all dependent on the local conditions, and I think that people just need to discuss it or speak with their local officials about it. You know, I'd imagine part of the thing about how long these things were was this storm has moved so slowly that you know, this is different than a lot of the other storms, and so putting a time limit on it was probably something that was difficult for some of the counties. But I can tell you this: they all want to be able to get people back into their places. They're not going to want to keep people out beyond what is necessary, but I think they're going to err on the side of safety.
Is that the same with the shelters? You still have about almost 10,000 people reported in shelters. I'm assuming that the southern counties are starting to close those shelters.
I don't know if they've closed any yet. I don't think so. So, you know, obviously, I think they waited and were prudent about when they opened the shelters. Some people said they should have opened them earlier, but as it turned out, they did it at the right time. And so, yeah, I think that's fine for the time being. And just in speaking with folks, I mean, I think there have been, I've not really heard a lot of problems with like people refusing to evacuate. I mean, obviously we know a lot of people typically don't always evacuate. I mean, that's just the nature of it. But the reports I've been getting has been similar to what was done with Matthew along the East Coast, and the response has been pretty similar.
A number of cities and counties have been frustrated by how long it's taken to be reimbursed for past hurricanes. What are you doing about that?
Well, we've done a lot about that. So when I came in, how much had we distributed for Hurricane Michael? Like 500,000?
So we did $203 million for Michael in a 6-month period.
But before we started.
So in that same 6-month period of time for Irma, they had only done about 500,000.
Yeah. So basically, there was FEMA would take. You know, they have processes they go through because the law imposes that on them, and then the money would come to Florida. And I said, Jared, get the money out quicker from our level. So Jared really, you know, redid this whole thing to make it, I think, more sensible, so that once we have the money, yes, we do whatever audits and make sure that the money should be reimbursable, but getting that money out. And so we had not had a lot of money put out on the street. We've put out, you know, hundreds of millions or whatever, 200 million for Michael. And so that's something, because I lived through Matthew, and I'd have my local folks come to me as the congressman saying, Congressman, you know, we need this money. And so then I would be like yelling at FEMA about it. But sometimes FEMA was actually putting the money out, and then the state was taking too long. So we've changed that. I think it's been changed for the better. We also did that. We got hundreds of, 150 million in citrus money, at least 150 million in citrus money. That's now gotten out. That was all the way from Hurricane Irma. And so we view it as important to try to get it out as soon as we can.
In one of the previous briefings, I believe there was concern expressed about possible flooding in northeast Florida, especially considering what happened with Matthew. Is that still a major concern as it makes its way north?
It's a concern. I just spoke with Sheriff Williams about it. You know, they're optimistic that the effects will be less than what were in Matthew, because if you look at the track of the storm, it's going to be further off the coast, and the rain bands are weaker on the west side of the storm, it seems like. But that's something that they're obviously bracing for, and that's something that you have to brace for if you're in that area.
So back on approving the public assistance grant funding for FEMA, I know that DEM had done everything possible to speed things up. There was also a process with FEMA that FEMA was also seeing some kinks in the process as well. Have any changes been made in regards to that? For instance, I think there was a review process for Congress that actually a lot of members used to put out press releases. Have you seen any changes in that regard, or maybe any chance that you can free up that area?
You know, one of our overarching goals, especially when it comes to recovery, is to reduce the complexity of FEMA. In some cases, the policies that we have, the regulations that we have, the statutes that we have are kind of piled on top of each other. One of our goals is to make it much simpler for those that get a disaster declaration, get reimbursed as quickly as possible. We know in some cases that jurisdictions it's an economic impact on their budget. They may not have enough capacity to handle the billions or millions of dollars beyond their annual appropriations. So again, we're trying to make that smoother. It's not a perfect system. Our goal is to make it as perfect as we can.
Governor, all the assets you mentioned in previous briefings, the 17,000 for FPL, just sustaining and stuff, are they going to be going to other states now? What are they?
So I would imagine that. So we've got state mutual aid, and I think Jared can say for sure. But I mean, we still have a lot of that here, and then once the storm passes, probably we'll end up going up the coast. FEMA's got a lot of assets here. They're already preparing to move it up the coast. And then, FPL's looking at, if this is less significant than Michael in terms of the power outages, then they're looking at, obviously, they'll have more than enough people to do that. And so I think some of those crews are out of state already, so you're going to see those probably move further north to be able to deal with the other southeast effects.
You said at the beginning that you didn't want to have things sort of be undertaken in a willy-nilly fashion. I believe that's what you said. And I just wanted to know whether or not you made a conscious determination in saying, I'm going to defer to the locals on evacuations. Was that were you thinking of in the past?
What we were doing was consulting with the locals, but here's how I viewed it as, I can sit here and just say whatever I want, but if the local folks aren't bought into it, I don't think it'll be effective. And so I'd much rather work with them, come to a solution that may be 90% of what Jared and I think's ideal, but then all be unified in that so we have a coherent message than to kind of be at loggerheads with folks. And, the thing about here is that the folks on the local emergency operations level, they're very good at what they do, particularly on the coastal counties, because this is something that they have to deal with. And so my view is, let's harness that experience and let's work together. And so I think it's worked better. I think there was frustration in the past when people were kind of crisscrossing the state, having to evacuate. Actually, some people evacuating into the storm path because they were told to evacuate at a certain time. The storm track changed, and so they're going from Miami to Tampa. Then they go back from Tampa back to Central Florida or back to the east coast of Florida. So we wanted to do it in a way where it would be, I think, a collaborative effort. And I think ultimately, as I've looked at these things in the past, storm response to me is a bottom-up effort, and it really starts in the counties. We obviously have an important role at the state to coordinate, and then you got the FEMA folks who are there offering the federal assistance. But that's really, I think, the way that it is most effective, and I think that was borne out so far with how this has gone, and I think that's going to continue to be our approach going forward. All right, well, we'll be back if we have anything more. Thanks.